I know you've seen a ton of videos about must-play games, but most of those lists are filled with overhyped, massively popular titles that everyone already knows. This list, it's all about the hidden gems, the ones that might have slipped under the radar but deserve your attention. And before moving on, I've noticed most of you watching aren't subscribed yet, so if you're into discovering more unique gaming experiences, it'll be worth it to hit that subscribe button. Now, let's get into it with the first game on the list.
The radio guide thing they talked about on the boat, you know? It's what, like 102.3?
Okay, sure.
Oxenfree. Now, Oxenfree has this strange way of making you feel like something's deeply wrong, even when everything seems calm. It's this supernatural thriller that plays with dialogue in ways other games don't really touch. Rather than just giving you choices, it lets you interrupt and steer conversations naturally while wandering around this eerie island full of strange radio signals. It's not like your usual paranormal scares game. It's more thoughtful, more unsettling. Being a group of teens caught up in a mystery? Sure, that's not new. But Oxenfree manages to balance the creepiness and the conversation so smoothly, you're constantly wondering if that tension among characters is a bit more uncomfortable than even the ghostly stuff going on. The atmosphere is where things really build, the fog rolling through, the bigger-than-life feeling of the ocean at night. It sneaks up on you, making the entire time you spend wandering this world feel like you're eavesdropping on something you aren't meant to hear. And then there's the radio mechanic, turning a dial to tune in. Almost like you're physically searching for answers, not just in the plot, but between the lines of what's said. That's how Oxenfree grabs hold of you without being bombastic. And somehow, that minimalist approach feels almost heavier. You set out thinking it's some teen drama set to spooky vibes, but it spirals into dimensions of grief and regret. Very human stuff, surrounded by supernatural chaos.
See, I just sometimes get a sort of a hunch, or what's a better word? Notion?
Next up is Before Your Eyes. So, Before Your Eyes asks for something no game really does. You're blinking. Yeah, literally. The entire game revolves around where your camera is tracking your real-life blinking, and that's how the story moves. It sounds kind of weird at first, but there's this incredibly personal touch when you start playing. Blinking through someone's life? Memories? It's wild because that one physical gesture, something so automatic for you, controls entire moments in the game, sometimes ending them before you're ready. You're pulled into this very intimate story about life, memories, and how fleeting those moments can be. Imagine it being like flipping through someone's most significant, beautiful, and heartbreaking moments, all based on an everyday thing like blinking. The emotional waves sneak up on you quickly. 1 second, you're in an innocent childhood. The next, you're rushing towards the inevitable. And it's not just emotional beats you're blinking through. Sometimes you're actively choosing when to leave small moments behind, making the experience more personal the longer you play. The uniqueness seriously stands out, and it's one of the most moving experiences without being heavy-handed. You're living and losing in real time, driven by a mechanic that's so simple it kind of feels cruel by the end of it, like life really speeding past in flashes.
Mr. Toad? Shit. Bigby! Listen, mate, I know I don't look human. It's a problem, I get it. I just stepped out the apartment for just a second to see what kind of damage this drunk shit is doing.
The Wolf Among Us. Here's the thing about The Wolf Among Us. It's gritty, it's noir, and it's all wrapped up in a world where fairy tale characters are real and not at all as magical as you might have imagined. You're Bigby Wolf, literally the big bad wolf, except instead of blowing down houses, you're trying to keep law and order among these fairy tale characters, living in the gritty backdrop of 1980s New York. It's part crime thriller, part character drama, but with talking pigs and chain-smoking frogs. The tone is phenomenal. That noir vibe hits you hard from the first scene, with dimly lit alleyways and characters who are constantly tiptoeing between their fairy tale identities and that harsh human world. Bigby's transformation scenes are wild. Suddenly, this calm detective dude becomes this angry, almost out-of-control wolf, and it's not just spectacle. It's the way the story blends morality with action. Choices feel weighty here, like one bad call could spiral into something you won't be able to fix later. The dialogue is another strength. It's sharp, well-crafted drama. Every interaction seems to hide something under the surface, especially given these characters' histories. Snow White? Yeah, she's not the princess you know. She's got baggage. That's where The Wolf Among Us shines, in making these larger-than-life characters feel just as broken, flawed, and real as the tough streets they live on. The contrast between fairy tale whimsy and noir brutality builds this tension that never leaves you, even when you're just talking in a bar.
Not particularly. Welcome to Camp Slayer.
You're early. Apologies for arriving early, Lieutenant. Things are moving fast.
Next up, we have the Dark Pictures Anthology House of Ashes. House of Ashes feels like it shouldn't work sometimes, but it pulls you in with those tense, claustrophobic environments and wild what happens next moments. The story, a group of military folk and scientists exploring underground ruins in Iraq, only to discover something far worse than old tombs. Horrific creatures lurking deep down there. It's part horror, part survival, and plays out like a cinematic experience where your choices stack up to determine who lives or dies. The tension builds fast. First, you've got the human drama. Not everyone in this group is on the same page. Add in some old secrets about the ruins and these spider-like creatures crawling around, instantly feels high stakes. Combat's rarely straightforward though. More often than not, you're making choices. Big ones like choosing who to help during a frantic escape, or smaller ones that might seem irrelevant until they come back to haunt you at some crucial moment later on. Like other Dark Pictures games, it's not just about surviving monsters. It explores deeper themes about human conflict, unresolved pasts, and fear. Plus, with its choice-based mechanics, decisions lead you to multiple outcomes, keeping you wondering what could have gone differently. As the tension ramps up, you'll notice the relationships between characters evolve, making the stakes feel even higher each time you're faced with a decision. It's a thriller filled with unpredictability. One little misstep can change everything, from a character's fate to the entire tone of the story by the time the credits roll.
Your look doesn't match your sound.
Excuse me?
You dress like a drifter, but you sound like a space opera.
Up next is The Artful Escape. The Artful Escape feels like a cosmic brainwave of sights and sounds. You're a young musician, Francis Vendetti, and at first you think this is going to be a small-town story, an artist living in the shadow of his famous uncle. But no, the game takes you into wild galactic light shows and surreal landscapes that would probably give Bowie a run for his money. While it starts out grounded, The Artful Escape quickly becomes anything but. What's cool is that it isn't just about finding the right notes on a guitar. It's more about finding yourself as a musician, learning what speaks to you and, well, how loud you want it to be. Every level is like a moving album cover, with colors and designs that don't even feel from this world. You've got neon skies, floating platforms, creatures that just feel like they're made of stardust. You get swept up in it all. Gameplay-wise, it's more chill than challenging. You're platforming through these surreal landscapes while holding down a button to shred your guitar, and somehow every flick of the strings matches the visual madness around you. The music isn't just background noise here, it's the heartbeat of the experience. Each sequence of intergalactic jams helps Francis define his identity, ripping away at expectations set on him. The emotional beats are all there too. Beneath the loud, vibrant universe, it tells this very human story of feeling trapped by others' dreams for you. It's about expression, breaking chains, and rocking out as the universe watches.
I manage.
Thanks for letting me stay here.
Didn't have much of a choice.
The Flower Collectors. The Flower Collectors has a vibe that's quietly intense, a slow burn with depth. You're in 1977 post-Franco Spain, and that's important because this game's murder mystery isn't just about solving a crime. It's layered with political tension, highlighting the fractures in a society that's trying to pick itself up from the aftermath of a dictatorship. You play as Jorge, a disabled ex-cop who spends his days in his apartment, partially cut off from the world outside. That is, until you witness a murder from your balcony, and things quickly spiral from there. This isn't your typical noir-esque detective story, though. You're investigating it all from a distance. Jorge observes the action through his binoculars, directing a young journalist named Melinda to gather clues. There's a Rear Window vibe to the entire setup, with a focus on what you can perceive from afar, but it also gives you this helpless edge because of how limited Jorge's mobility is. You can only do so much, and the tension is in making sure she's getting to the right places at the right time. The political backdrop adds weight to every interaction. You're not just figuring out who killed who, you're uncovering the darker side of regime change, the moral gray areas around loyalty and forgiveness. It blends personal reflection and political intrigue so tightly that it's hard to separate the two. And suddenly this small murder investigation feels like it speaks to something much bigger.
Hey, come on, wake up! Wake up! Thank God you're all right.
Next on the list is South of the Circle. This game drops you into the Cold War era, but it's not about spies or massive political tensions. It's this intimate, character-driven story about memory and survival with an almost dreamlike quality. You're Peter, a Cambridge academic, crash-landed in the frozen landscape of Antarctica. The immediate focus is survival, but the game very quickly drifts between Peter's harsh present and his fragile past, making you question how much of this journey is real and how much is wrapped up in Peter's own memories. What really stands out here is the cinematic presentation. The visuals have this minimalist, almost painted style to them, and that adds to the whole dream flow as you travel back and forth in Peter's life. The conversations and choices you make aren't just binary decisions that lead to simple yes or no outcomes. Instead, they reflect the more nuanced decisions we make in everyday life. The balance between personal ambition, relationships, and responsibility. Dialogue is more emotional than mechanical here. Instead of picking from clear choices, you're often asked to react based on feeling, and those reactions shape the narrative in ways that aren't always expected. And while Peter's struggle against the Antarctic isn't a series of set pieces, the tension isn't lost, because it feels more psychological, more reflective. It's a war between following duty and searching for solace in the past, making each choice feel deeply human. Everything in South of the Circle ties back to these larger themes of memory, identity, and what really survives when you're facing a frozen wasteland, all wrapped up by the Cold War's quiet, looming threat.
Just some car trouble, kid. What are you doing out here?
Up next, we have Road 96. Road 96 creates these endlessly different adventures while keeping you on the same goal: crossing a country and reaching freedom. Every time you start a journey, it's like hitting shuffle on a soundtrack that'll be completely different from the last. Procedurally generated paths mean that no two road trips ever unfold in the same way. From the characters you meet to the places you'll discover. One minute you're hitching a ride with a truck driver, and the next, you're in the middle of a tense border control situation. The randomness gives the game so much potential for unique moments. Everything in the game, its dialogue choices, the methods of travel, even whether you choose to get involved in political unrest or steer clear of danger, shifts the outcome of each journey. Sometimes you'll have a chill trip filled with quirky characters and low-stakes conversations. Other times, it puts you up against really intense decisions where just one wrong choice might stop you from ever reaching the border. That's the thing about Road 96. It drops you into these small, personal stories, but you're always part of something bigger that's shaking up the whole country. Throughout each run, you piece together the larger narrative of a politically torn land. The randomness doesn't make it feel disconnected either. Instead, it feels like a mosaic, with every trip adding a new tile to help you fully realize the greater context around the country you're fleeing from. It's unpredictable but meaningful, as though every journey doesn't just take you down a road, but through layers of a society's struggles. Last Day of June feels more like an emotional art piece than a traditional puzzle game. It tells the story of Carl, a man who loses his wife, June, in a tragic accident. But here's where it gets really interesting. You're not just reliving memories with her. The game asks you to dive into these surreal, world-bending puzzles based on those memories, where Carl tries desperately to change the fate that took her away. The environments have this soft, ethereal look, almost like a painting in motion, which gives everything a dreamlike quality, especially in the way those memories shift and change. A big part of the gameplay revolves around rewinding and manipulating time, not with some complex sci-fi gadgetry, but through moments of Carl's life and his interactions with those around him. Each character has a unique role in the story, and you'll need to figure out how to adjust their storylines to achieve different results. Every time you change something, it rewinds the clock a little, but the emotional stakes stay steady. It's not really about getting the perfect outcome, but rather about understanding the weight of each action, how grief and the desire to fix things can blur memory and reality. There's minimal dialogue, which works in its favor. The story relies on strong, atmospheric cues, like the colors of the landscape or subtle changes in music. It's an emotional puzzle, where it's not just about solving tasks, but grappling with the question of whether things might have been different in a version of the world where grief didn't play out the way it did. Up next is The Suicide of Rachel Foster. This game takes place in a deserted hotel, and the echoes of its history are deeply embedded in every room you walk through. You're playing as Nicole, returning to her family's abandoned hotel after years away, and you're piecing together both familial secrets and unresolved trauma involving Rachel, a girl who supposedly ended her life there years prior. Almost immediately, the place doesn't feel empty. It's filled with whispers of its past, heavy with unresolved questions. Walking through the slowly decaying halls of the hotel, you aren't just interacting with the environment randomly. Each corner, each photo, each item left behind connects to a larger story that's haunting in its emotional depth. The game's first-person perspective means you're slowly soaking in every inch of the hotel while uncovering not just the tragedy of Rachel's death, but the complicated and disturbing layers of Nicole's family history. Everything feels touchable, as if you're experiencing this unraveling thread of dark secrets through physical objects. And the isolation is real. While you do have someone to talk to via radio, the bulk of the experience is tied into environmental exploration and how the story slowly peels away until you're left with an uncomfortable but undeniably compelling picture of the reality behind Rachel's death. It balances emotional weight with its eerie, mystery-driven atmosphere, making the act of discovery feel unsettlingly personal. Next up, we have Kentucky Route Zero. This game plays out like a fever dream, a slow, surreal journey through a hauntingly familiar yet magically unreal version of rural America. It's this episodic adventure that blends magical realism with pointed social commentary, and it unfolds at a meandering pace that forces you to marinate in every strange detail. The story centers on Conway, a driver trying to make a delivery across this enigmatic highway, but it spirals into something much more layered as you meet odd characters and dive deeper into the mysteries hidden along Route Zero itself. Everything here feels soaked in symbolism. Most of the game's action happens in conversations or dreamlike encounters that often feel disconnected from reality, but that disconnection somehow makes the narrative even stronger. It's almost like you're moving through different realities, each scene a snapshot of something that stretches far beyond what's happening on the surface. At the same time, Kentucky Route Zero doesn't let you forget the human element. Despite all the magical imagery, it's grounded in real-world themes: debt, work, loss, the weight of time pressing down on rural communities. The writing consistently draws you deeper into its world through quiet pauses and reflective dialogue, where every word feels purposefully placed. It's the kind of game that lingers in your thoughts long after you've stepped away, with equal parts melancholy and magic swirling around every moment you experience. Heavenly Bodies plays with physics in such a way that it feels like a dance, only you're in space, and that dance is more of a struggle to get anything done without gravity. You play as an astronaut, or astronauts if you're co-oping, trying to complete complex space tasks with simple controls and the ever-present floatiness of zero gravity. The narrative's subtle. You're really here to experience what it means to control, or rather fail to control, every movement in an environment where gravity doesn't exist. The game's genius is in the precision, or lack thereof, required to finish even the most simplistic tasks. Rotating a lever, fixing a satellite, even gripping a handle requires a balance of buttons that feels complicated at first, but becomes absurdly satisfying once you get into the groove. It's physics-based chaos that gives way to small moments of victory, where you feel like a real astronaut who's overcoming the physical limitations of space. Narratively, it doesn't shove much at you, but there is a quiet drama under the surface. Each mission, laid out with historical and scientific themes, starts to tell a broader story about the struggles and triumphs of working in the harsh conditions of space. It's subtle, kind of whispering at you through the silence, making each awkward grab at a control feel like a bridge between player activity and the survival of an astronaut confronting the vast nothingness of space.
I can't take this anymore!
I just wanted to...
I don't belong with them!
Up next is Sea of Solitude. Sea of Solitude doesn't really tell you about loneliness. It turns it into something you can touch, see, and wade through. You play as Kay, trapped in a world where her feelings have become literal monsters, manifesting in this stormy ocean of her mind. The game's visuals switch between calming waters and gloomy, flooded cityscapes, reflecting Kay's emotional state. It's a world that feels alive, a place where the characters you encounter aren't your usual NPCs. They've all become literal representations of fear, anger, isolation. The design of these monsters is striking too, her own manifestations of dark emotions. One minute, you're being chased by a massive sea creature that embodies fear, and the next, you're working through puzzles that involve guiding lights as metaphors for finding hope. The metaphorical weight isn't lost. Every action here feels tied back to Kay's struggle. Every solution brings a little understanding about why these monsters exist. As you navigate, it's a constant ebb and flow of reflecting on real-life emotional struggles. It's that mixture of simplistic but meaningful game mechanics mixed with surreal yet personal visual storytelling that tugs at something just below the surface. This isn't a game about destroying the bad guys and being victorious. It's about understanding yourself, confronting what's out there, and navigating the ocean of your emotions. Next on the list is Vane. In Vane, you're not given much up front, just a vast desert and a strange, decaying world. No dialogue, no clear narrative framing. Instead, you're left to explore, transform into a bird, and unravel what feels like a forgotten civilization. You're constantly shifting between this strange bird form and a child, which has this fascinating push and pull feel. When you're a bird, the world seems massive, full of freedom. But as a child, everything suddenly feels claustrophobic, asking you to solve puzzles and navigate ruins on ground level. The beauty of Vane is in its silence. There's a meditative quality to flying aimlessly, with the golden sands beneath you and decaying machines littered throughout the world, whispering stories about what was once there. When you're on foot, things are slower, making each step feel heavy, almost like you're rediscovering something lost, even though you're moving forward. More than anything, it's atmospheric. You're not handed story beats. Instead, you're left to interpret everything through visuals and mood. One moment, you're soaring through dusty air, chasing some gravitational anomaly in the distance. The next, you're a child walking through crumbling ruins, piecing together some long-forgotten mystery. It feels like you're uncovering the game's meaning just as much as you're uncovering its world. It's quite a unique game, and I think this one is pretty worth playing too.
What is this? I can't hold on! Get off!
Blackwood Crossing feels intimate, like you're stepping into someone else's dream. It's this surreal first-person adventure that kicks things off with two siblings riding a train, but the more you explore, the more that train morphs into something mystical. You're Scarlet, tasked with looking after your younger brother Finn, but as you move deeper into this bizarre world, it becomes clear you're navigating more than just physical spaces. This is an emotional journey of two siblings struggling with loss and understanding each other as they grow apart. The game keeps the puzzles reasonably simple, but that's not really the point. The point is in how it uses storytelling and game mechanics to channel feelings. You move through strange environments that twist into fantastical set pieces, with magic spilling out onto the train or characters who are faceless yet full of symbolism. At its heart, it's about loss and memory, but there's a magical realism overlay that turns every scene into something otherworldly. As you progress, objects and moments take on more emotional depth. Rather than just solving a puzzle for the sake of continuing, you're uncovering pieces of Finn and Scarlet's fractured relationship. You start realizing it's less about how things in this world work mechanically and more about why they matter emotionally. So, next is Ether 1. The fragility of memory has always been a rich concept for games, but Ether 1 explores it in a way that's both tender and haunting. You're diving into the fractured mind of a dementia patient, piecing together their history by interacting with objects scattered across their mind's ruined landscapes. From the start, it's clear this game's going to demand patience. You're not bombarded with flashy gameplay, but instead, slow, deliberate exploration of a mind that's falling apart at the seams. The puzzles are as much about logic as they are about understanding emotions. Each fragment of memory you find isn't just a clue, it's a life, small, delicate, and at risk of being forgotten. The mechanics follow suit too. You're asked to rebuild memories, but it's not about solving complex contraptions or platforming challenges. Instead, it's about seeing the world from the perspective of someone who's lost control of their own identity. And that contrast between the physical and mental decay, a world filled with objects that once carried so much meaning now buried under time, invites you to not just complete puzzles, but think about what those puzzles represent. Even when things start to come into place, you never fully shake the feeling that memory, like reality, can slip away faster than you can grasp it. Night in the Woods. Night in the Woods isn't about saving the world. It's about walking through a place that used to be home, but now feels like a stranger. You play as May, a college dropout returning to her sleepy hometown of Possum Springs, only to find that things didn't just freeze when she left. Everything's a little off. Friends have moved on, the town's economy has seen better days, and there's this quiet, unsettling undercurrent of change that May can't or won't acknowledge. What sets it apart is how much it loves its characters. Every person you meet, from your old bandmates to the snack falcon clerk, feels lived in. Conversations are sharp, complicated, and grounded in this kind of melancholy humor about growing up or failing to grow up. The way that Night in the Woods handles that post-college aimlessness feels all too real, but with a layer of magical realism woven in, like the odd dreams May keeps having, or that dark mystery brewing beneath the surface of the town. Even when the game touches on heavy subjects like mental health, economic decline, or the weight of expectations, it never loses its warmth. It's heartfelt but never heavy-handed, focusing on the small moments that define hometown life rather than a grand narrative. Each dialogue choice feels like it's building on something real, and gradually, so does the weight of coming to terms with not just change, but the idea that maybe home isn't what it used to be. Next up, we have Lost Words Beyond the Page. In this game, you don't just read a story, you quite literally walk through it. The entire game is built within the journal of a young girl named Izzy, where her words shape both the world and the gameplay. It's part heartfelt platformer, part emotional coming-of-age tale, with Izzy's thoughts and feelings unfolding in real time. It starts off simple. You're running along sentences written on ruled notebook pages, leaping across words, shifting phrases to solve puzzles. Strangely enough, the platforming isn't about rigidly precise movements. Instead, it feels almost like a dance through Izzy's memories and emotions. As you go deeper, the journal sections begin tying into a much larger theme, Izzy's way of coping with loss. And while you're interacting with her written words, you're also playing through a fantasy story she's creating to process her feelings. There's this duality, the grounded reality of her pain, and the imaginative escape she's written to find some control in her world again. What Lost Words nails is that feeling of writing as a way to work through tumultuous feelings. It isn't a game that quietly evokes these emotions. It purposefully makes them the core of every mechanic. The art style is soft and comforting, even when the subject matter isn't, pulling you into the colorful fantasy world while also keeping that personal, handwritten narrative always hovering close. The power of words here is almost literal. You're shaping the world just as much as Izzy is shaping her own healing journey. Seasons After Fall introduces you to a world of quiet magic. You're a fox, but not just any ordinary fox. You have control over the seasons. As you explore this hand-painted forest filled with mysterious creatures and ancient magic, the game asks you to think about the impact of change. You can shift between the seasons at will, and that's where the real joy of the game lies. It's not just a navigation tool. Each season fundamentally reshapes the environment's layout and interaction. Winter freezes ponds, summer makes overgrown vines flourish, fall brings rolling winds, and spring invites rain to help you reach places you couldn't before. And Seasons After Fall is in no rush. The platforming is patient, the puzzles require thought, but nothing feels like it's there to stress you out. Instead, the game wants you to admire the world. Observe how its natural order responds to seasons shifting in real time. The game's pacing is more about solving these gentle, rhythmic puzzles while the world softly reacts to your presence. But underneath that peaceful exterior, there's a bigger story about balance. The spirits of the seasons need your help to restore the natural flow of things, and as you progress, you get small, reflective moments about nature and the cyclical patterns it follows. The handcrafted animations and soothing symphonic soundtrack blend together to create an environment that feels alive each time the seasons lock into place, adding layers of depth as you play, making Seasons After Fall less about speed and more about savoring the magic of dynamic change. And finally, we have Tacoma. Tacoma introduces you to a world that's already been lived in. Unlike typical sci-fi adventures where you might expect a slow unraveling of a mystery, here it's all about piecing together the lives of the crew who used to inhabit the deserted space station by digging through augmented reality recordings. You voyeuristically watch these interactions unfold like ghostly holograms, seeing the crew members' last days unfold in overlapping conversations and mundane activities. The station feels eerie, not in a haunted way, but because it's so empty, yet so full of left-behind traces. What sets Tacoma apart from other narrative-driven games is how interactive those recordings are. You're constantly scrubbing through them, fast-forwarding, rewinding, rewatching to catch different threads of the same conversation, because the crew's conversations overlap naturally. Everyone has their own story to tell, and often these stories connect or collide. The magic comes in finding those moments where everything clicks, where a small detail in the background of one conversation tells you something about a totally different thread. The dynamic way the game lets you engage with these AR memories feels deeply cinematic, yet uniquely player-driven. Each crew member feels distinct, not just because of the writing, but how you're reading into their relationships, ambitions, and small acts of kindness or conflict through these fragmented, fleeting moments. It's ultimately about human survival, not from external threats, but from the psychological toll of isolation, duty, and connection. You aren't controlling the events, but understanding them, learning by observing the fractured lives in this high-tech, deserted future. So, there you have it, folks. If you enjoyed discovering these hidden gems, make sure to give this video a like and subscribe so you don't miss out my future videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.